So you watch this awesome movie the night before, and you wake up the next morning, and you're all hyped up, and you feel like, "Oh, I'm gonna make this awesome new design for, I don't know, whatever it is you want to do." So you start working on it, and it looks pretty cool. But then you ask the internet for advice, and they say something like this: "It's too noisy, it needs areas for your eyes to rest," or something along those lines. So I've always hated that advice, not because it's wrong, but because it's a little superficial. And what I always wanted when I posted a screenshot of my work in progress was for somebody to just grab it, do a paint over to sort of like fix it, and then return it to me. And I guess that's a little selfish, but that's what's most helpful. And that is what I'm going to try to do with this helmet right here, which was provided by someone who reached out to me and said they were having a little bit of trouble finishing it. They were wondering how it could be improved. And I'll say right off the bat, it's a pretty cool design. It has a lot of elements that I actually like. In fact, let me just make the eyes even cooler. Let's add a different material. Let me hide this piece of the body. Okay, so I think one way we can improve this is by actually removing some of this detail. Because right now, the sheer amount of elements is just a little too high. And having a lot of detail isn't actually bad. But the issue we're having right here, in fact, give me 1 second. Let's use yellow in case someone is colorblind. So we have a lot of elements here, but they're all pretty much the same size. Nothing really stands out as being the primary element, and then secondary elements and small areas of detail. So in other words, our detail density is all the same. There's no contrast. And that goes back to what I was saying at the start, about having areas for your eyes to rest. So one mistake that I did a lot when I was trying to add detail to my model is my go-to form of detail would be panel lines. I thought, I need some detail here. What can I do? I'd split the panel or just draw a new panel line. So there's a lot of panels here that are split that don't really need to be. We can merge some of these pieces and create bigger pieces, and that's how we're going to create some contrast by having shapes of different sizes. And on top of that, another thing that we forget is that we don't actually need a lot of detail in our sculpt, because remember that after the sculpt, we're probably going to render this as well, and we're going to have different materials and different colors, and then we're going to add textures, and on top of that, decals. So we sometimes make the mistake of adding too much detail in the sculpt, but the sculpt is only the first phase, and there's a lot more that comes after that. So let's see how we can simplify this. Before we do anything, a very brief example of what I'm talking about. So we have this shape, and actually we're going to need this a bunch of times, so let's just duplicate it right now. Okay, I don't know if I need more, but let's do this for now. Okay, so we start out, we do something like this, we just add a bunch of detail everywhere, everything is pretty even. So then, the first feedback we get is, no, what you want is areas for your eyes to rest. Okay, so you do something like this. Maybe more like this. So this is your rest area, and this is your detail. And this is also known as the 70-30 rule. You're gonna hear this one a lot. Okay, but then, if you're working on an isolated piece, the 70-30 rule is pretty useful when you're thinking about where you want to add something, where you want to add this panel line or some detail. It basically just means don't make things even. That's kind of what it says, but it pretty much ends there. There are other ways of looking at it, but it doesn't tell you much when somebody just says 70-30 rule, okay? So the next step is thinking about big, medium, and small shapes. So instead of just doing this, we do this. So this is our big shape. This is our medium shape. And then here, we add a little, I don't know, a small shape or something. Something like this. Small. So this is definitely improvement, but you're also going to hear this quite a few times, but it wasn't until someone said it to me like this that it actually clicked. So instead of saying big, medium, and small, they said main shapes, sub shapes, and areas of detail. And I've never really heard it like that. But when they said it like that, I realized that it's not just about different sizes, it's about a relationship between the pieces. So instead of just having this, we now have something like this because we're now thinking about how things connect with each other. You know, which is the primary element and the secondary and then the tertiary. And in fact, maybe we start doing something like this. I don't know. And then you go beyond this piece right here and you realize that primary and secondary and all of that, it doesn't just apply to creating shapes of different sizes, but that it also applies to, how do we do this? Okay, so you can also have different materials and use that instead to create the contrast. So it's not just about size, you can use colors as well. These are the worst colors I could have picked. Okay, this is a better example of the end result. So let's actually grab this arrow right here and move it. Okay, so now we not only have different sizes, but we're also thinking about different materials, you know, some, I don't know, some sort of metal, this can be some plastic, and this can be a little glowy light or something, I don't know. But notice how this right here is a secondary element. And you can say, oh, this right here, this is the detail. But notice that within the detail, you can like keep going because this also has some tiny detail. So you have detail within detail. Whoa! So you can create things that are way more complex than just this. And I already know that my drawing skills are not good enough to demonstrate this when I try to go about redesigning the helmet. So that's why we have this example right here. And that's why I've never really liked it when people talk about areas to rest your eyes, because they're kind of stopping at this stage right here. And there's a lot that comes after it. And I'm not saying that the 70-30 rule is wrong, but I'm saying that if you just think about it in these very simple terms, then you're not going to get very far. But however, if you notice that I used it multiple times here, I did 70-30 here, so this is 70. Let's use a different color. Okay, so this is 70-30, and at some point this becomes 70, and this detail right here becomes 30. But then we can keep going. Then this tiny little detail right here becomes 30. And there's this whole hierarchy that just talking about rest areas doesn't even begin to go into. So this all seems pretty simple, you know, when you look at the examples like this, but putting it into practice tends to be a little bit more difficult. And now let's actually do something. So I almost got a clean slate, so to speak. So I hit a lot of the detail, and I'm just trying to come up with some primary elements and then some smaller shapes inside of those, and so on and so forth. And I I sped this up because I don't want you to pay too much attention to the technique. You know, I'm not really good at drawing at all. Making it go fast makes it look better than it actually is. You know, this actually took a while. But this is not about how to illustrate or anything like that. I want you to keep your focus on what we were talking about, which was primary elements, secondary, and little details. And I'm just refining the shape a little bit. I'm trying to borrow as many elements as I can from the pre-existing design because sure, it would have been easier to just start from scratch entirely. I mean, that's kind of why I faded a lot of the details so I wouldn't be distracted by them. But I don't want this to be my design. So that's why I'm trying to reuse some of the elements that already existed. But with a little bit of a tweak. And it's mostly just drawing lines. 2D is really great when you're trying to come up with any sort of design because as long as you only work with lines, then you get to work with this abstraction. There's no form and you don't have to worry about volumes like when you're working in 3D. So it can be a lot harder if you don't know what you're doing, like myself. But at the same time, it can sort of free you from some of the constraints of 3D. So I'm also trying to create a little bit of contrast by just adding different tones. And that really helps when it comes to identify the primary elements and the secondary ones. And now I think it's time to add a little bit of detail here and there. And I'm not actually good at detailing. I really need reference for this, which I wasn't using, so a lot of this is just random detail that I was trying to come up with. Nothing really crazy. And then we fade them out a little bit because they were too strong. And I really didn't know what to do in this piece. If I'm being honest. What's that? I don't know. Some little screws here and there, really tiny details. And you probably can't see this because we're going so fast, but I turned off my paint over so many times so I could actually see what the original design was and borrow from that. And I actually am trying to create some volume this time on the helmet because it's so flat, but I don't really know how to illustrate or anything, so I'm just doing what I think might work. I add some white lines and then I just blur them out to try to make it look like my helmet has some volume, but yeah, don't look at me for illustration techniques. Make this little shape smaller, and we're done. Okay, so now that we have these side by side, the purpose of all this wasn't to just say, this is what your helmet should look like. Not at all. The purpose was to demonstrate that you don't really need that much detail to make something look interesting. And if you do want to add detail, instead of just spacing everything out evenly, sort of like this. So what you want to do is think about big shapes and then small shapes and then areas of detail. So this would be a big shape. Small, I can't write this small. And then detail. And you see how this is a lot more appealing than just spacing everything out evenly. And I won't say that I was 100% successful, but I will say that is the reason I don't like it when people only talk about areas to rest your eyes, because they're only talking about these big pieces right here. They're not really talking about this like hierarchy, this relationship between the pieces, or how it goes beyond differently sized shapes, and you can actually use it with materials as well, which is what I did right here. This giant white piece right here could be plastic, and then our secondary element can be a completely different material. And then our areas of detail, what we did right here, becomes these like glowy lights that we can place in different areas of our model. I don't know. So it goes beyond just differently sized shapes. So that's why you don't need to add that much detail, because you're also going to have different materials and colors. And I didn't even mention decals. We could have a decal right here, one here. Whatever. So hopefully that can at least give you some ideas on things that you can do. And it's funny because I said that these pieces were evenly sized, but I just realized I did a similar thing, but at a bigger scale. I created the Windows logo right here. So like I said, I wasn't 100% successful, but you get the idea.